You want to make a pixel art game, but you suck at making 2D art? Well, I got the solution for you. Alright, so if we take a look at these, we have two obvious 3D models here. But with one little trick, and I mean just a little trick, we can make it look like we're actually working with pixel art. So if you suck at making 2D art, but you're great at making 3D models, well, now you can take your 3D work and, in a way, kind of translate that into creating yourself a pixel art game. Now, this is, of course, just a visual trick. As you can see here, if we look behind it. But of course, you're only going to show this, or you're going to have this always in front of the camera so that everything is always kind of translated in this way. And you can always mess around with the numbers to determine how pixelated the result's going to be. And of course, it's going to depend on how close the camera is to the actual thing as well. But this is a trick that has actually been used in games that you may have already played or heard of. I believe Dead Cells is one of them that actually uses a 3D model with their main character, but then displays them in this kind of pixel form like this when it comes to the actual game. And the benefit of this is you get the 3D smoothness of your animations in, of course, 3D, but you can show it in 2D. So you can almost get like smoother animations doing this. But of course, it's not true 2D, but it gives it its own kind of unique style, its own unique look. Now, I mentioned you could change this depending on how, what you would like. And we can do that with this number over here. And I'll show you how to do this in a moment. But see, the default I have set here is 20, but we can change this to, say, 10. And you see it's a lot less blurred, but we still have that pixelation going on. But really, it's all going to come down to what numbers kind of satisfy the look that you're going for, or how pixelated you really want to get. And to do this, as you can see, it's just like a screen that we got going on here. And all this is a plain mesh that I've got held up. And I've just attached a shader onto it. And this shader is very simple. The majority of it is basically copy and pasting one line over and over, just adding onto it. So if you don't know how to do this, we can create a 3D mesh. So we can come in, and we just create a mesh instance. And I've called mine Pixel Shader. You can come on in. I'm using a cube so that I can look at both sides, so none of this even matters, and I just flattened it out like you can see here. A plane should work as well, but if it doesn't for whatever reason work for you, I'm currently using a cube that I've just flattened out. Now inside of this we have the material section. Just open that up and go ahead and create a new material, and it's going to be a shader material. Open that up. And for the shader, go ahead and create a new shader. So you just hit this little drop down menu here and hit new shader. And you'll get the shader code opening up down here at the bottom. And our first line here, we're just telling it that it is what type of shader it is. And we're telling it that this is going to be unshaded. So if you've done or messed with materials before, render mode, this is kind of like our flags, right? So we're putting this here as like taking unshaded. Uniform float. So this is effectively like how we create variables, right? So this is like our variable. It's a float, and then the name of it, and then our default parameter, which I showed you earlier, was 20. And because we have this is actually going to show up on the right-hand side here, inside of our little inspector here. Once you go into the shader, so if I just click on the scan, click on that, not go into our shader, but just come into here, you can see we got shader params and it's just right here. So I'm just going to go back into the shader code again. And void fragment, we're using this. You put this in because it is considered a fragment shader. And you can see just by looking at this, a lot of this, we're pretty much just copy and pasting a lot of this code repeatedly. So you can see this is about half of the code in here. And it's basically 2 lines with some numbers being altered. And we got 3, another 2 up here, or 3 again, so 6. So you see a lot of this is very repetitive when we get into here. And if you mess with materials, albedo is just messing with the color, which is what's helping us. Oops, I didn't want to put that in there. So I'll go ahead and just leave this on the screen again, just a little longer here. And you see at the very end, I'm dividing it by 16. So since we're actually showing this code with the float here, you can obviously mess with the default number in here inside the script if you wanted to. Or you can mess with it in the inspector, again, if we back out of the actual code here. Either way is completely up to you. 20 is the default that I figured looks pretty good. 20 is what you saw in the beginning at the intro. But again, you can mess with that, make it higher or lower. Pretty well going through it, figure out what works best or what looks best for the aesthetic that you're going for. We just look around here. I believe we're set back on 15 for this. Yeah, so this is to look at 15. And remember, if we were to back all the way out here, that doesn't look too great. So obviously you wouldn't want the camera to be this far. You wouldn't want the objects to be that far back. But if we're up close like this, what we're seeing being that far back is kind of equivalent, almost equivalent to maybe 80 to 100 of tweaking that number if we were to be this close. So keep in mind how close this is going to be to your objects, how close your camera is going to be to obviously this wall, and of course keep this in front of your camera. Oops. And you can see that the one issue with this is our water shader here is pretty much non-existent behind this wall. So that is one negative here, is if you got a water shader, it's not going to be visible. It's just unfortunately how it is. But aside from that one downside, this is an easy way for you to do or create some pixel art if you're only good with 3D and you've never been good at making 2D art itself. But there you go. I just figured I'd drop that in as a little hint or tip for some of you out there that might not be that great at making 2D art, but you still want to create pixel art games.